name's Jon Ingold. I'm the narrative director of Inkle, which is a small independent game studio. It's been around for about 10 years.
My name is Brotherson, and I am writer and narrative designer on Windrush Tales, amongst many other things that I do across video games and comic books and other mediums.
So my route into video games and video game writing was quite a strange one. I tried to be a writer of books and no one was very interested. So I ended up in computer games and I tried to write for those, but no one would let me do that either. So then I founded my own studio and hired myself as a writer, and now I'm a successful video game writer, thanks to having a really great publisher who is also me and my co-founder.
My career in video games started when I realised that you actually could get a job in video games itself. It was very much an esoteric medium back in the 1990s. So I studied to become a journalist. I did an MA in journalism, and then after that point I basically went straight into video game journalism for a few years. I kind of bounced around a few companies after that. I worked for Yahoo as a games producer and editorial writer. Then I did freelancing for a little while across various sites like Eurogamer. And then I ended up working at PlayStation for about 12 years as a video game content producer. And after that point, I managed to kind of squeeze myself into video game writing itself.
For me as a writer, authentic representation is really just the process of trying to connect with the characters that you're writing and make sure that they feel true and human.
Authentic representation, I feel, tends to be something which feels a creation that feels lived in, that feels accurate and representative of the era or peoples or situations that you've created. This can come from a myriad of different angles and sources, and it really depends on what your aspects and what your aims are when you're creating the story itself.
I always try to think from the ground up when I'm writing. I try to understand the person that I'm writing about and what drives them and what are they scared of and what are they interested in and what do they like and what do they want and all those sort of questions, and build that connection between me, the writer, and this character so that I can write them, because I can't write them if I don't understand them. And then what's authenticity in that? Well, I suppose it's whether you think the character you've invented or understood makes any sense or not. And then hopefully you take it out into the world and you show it to people and they go, oh yeah, I can understand that person too from what you've written. But it's definitely not one thing. It's a kind of process, it's a craft. And I'm not even sure I'm good at it, but I like to think that I try, and that's something.
I think there's no specifically right or wrong way to do it. There are lots of ways that you can approach it. But I think in trying to achieve authenticity, you're trying your best way to make sure that people who are familiar with the material feels like, oh, you know what you're talking about, you know you're representing actually accurately what you're trying to show in the story itself. And people who may not necessarily know what you're talking about feel it's convincing and truthful.
But variety is one of the most important parts of storytelling, and it always has been. If you tell a story that people have seen 100 times before, or you use characters that people have seen before, no one's going to want to explore your world. So going out into the world and finding the enormous number of places and settings and people and styles and cultures that just don't turn up in fiction is the richest possible playground for a writer. And so you're always wanting to draw on that. You're always wanting to find the next interesting thing that sparks your own interest and that hopefully will spark the interest of the audience.
Trying to bring creativity and authenticity together can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes the two tend to grind against each other, especially in video games where you're looking at effectively two different genres all the time. You're looking at the genre of the gameplay and the genre of the narrative itself. And sometimes with authenticity and realism and kind of creativity, they can grind against each other because you're trying your best to strive for authenticity, which can sometimes mean that your creativity has to kind of pay homage to that. I think, again, it really depends on what your aims are and when you're creating the story itself. If you can create something which you feel represents exactly what you want to convey for the audience from an emotional point of view, from a tonal point of view, then hopefully you can play with it to make it feel creative in its own way, whether that's in the presentation itself or the way that you convey the narrative, but you can still stay within the lanes of an authentic story and manage to kind of, I guess, move around with it in a way which feels a little bit different compared to what may have come beforehand.
It's really difficult for publishers to be authentic in their representation because so much of the time they're worried about the bottom line, and the bottom line is naturally conservative. It says what sold last time and can we do it again? And so in my opinion, they're in a problem which they maybe don't actually have a good way of solving. But for indies, like my company, like all the other indies out there, we have a free hand and we should be doing absolutely everything we could to exploit that.
I think for big studios, in terms of trying to create authentic representation versus, for example, indie studios, smaller studios, it is more difficult. This is not to excuse the bigger studios, but it is more difficult for them because they have to deal with things like financial issues, shareholders, the typical classic bottom line, essentially. And with smaller studios, your hands are less tied to a lot of those different factors. There's also less people trying to dip their fingers into the pie, essentially. You have less people to answer to, and so there's a little bit more creative freedom, typically speaking, not all the time, but typically speaking, there's a lot more creative freedom for the actual developers to be able to play around with and try and find that level of authenticity and representation that can be really, really important. Some big studios can do a really good job of it, but I feel there has to be a line between the people who are extremely concerned about making money and the people who are concerned about making authentic, representative, creative story and game at the end of the day.
One of the great advantages of being an independent commercial studio is that you can make what you want to make in the way that you want to make it, and I think leveraging that has been really successful for Inkle, and I've seen it work for lots of other small studios as well. It's a superpower, really.